So, good morning. No one has emailed me, actually there's only one person who's even here right now, emailed me about finding a chavrusa to review.
We have one.
Oh, good. Oh, kol hakavod.
Very good one.
Oh, you have one too? Oh, fantastic. Okay, kol hakavod. That makes me very happy. I decided, by hook or by crook, I'm going to force you guys, in a way, to retain the information, at least on some level, in a very small way. I hope you'll appreciate it. I think you will. In the long run, you'll hopefully appreciate it. So this is the technique I'm going to teach. It's super short. This isn't going to supplant. I hope you will do a review with each other. Talking about Chazorah is very important. But in addition to that, so I'm going to give you a Chazal say you only remember you're learning through simanim, through
mnemonics.
Yeah, mnemonics. That's right. That's good. Through mnemonic devices. So I'm going to teach you one way of memory technique, which Bez Hashem I will stick to as we progress through Shah slowly, which at least give you some kind of handle on retaining learning. It's very small, but at least minute for minute, the amount of minutes it takes to employ this method, the amount of retention you'll have, it's very powerful. The technique was taught to me by a rabbi, a friend of mine, Avraham Goldhar is his name, a friend of mine in New Jersey, who's a pedagogic expert. So the thing goes like this, that the way a person remembers anything is only through association. And therefore, there's a method, it's called the PEG method, I think he calls that, I'm sure people before him called it that you associate certain contents and certain ideas pegged to something that's memorable. Here's how the system works. The system I use in this class. It'll spend a lot of time going forward, but the first time I'll explain it for a moment. Like this. So you associate with each daf, the daf, mar, base, gimel, daled, and so on. So associate a particular image or concept with each daf. So for base, the association is bias. You can remember that, right? And gimel, it will be gamal, it's a camel, and daled will be a delet, a door, and so on. I'll give them to you as they come out. And the simple idea is this. That for daf base, and it's true for daf base, whether it's daf base of Brachos, or daf base of Shabbos, or daf base of anything number two, you'll associate some image. This is especially useful if you're a vision, different kinds of learners, but some people are visual learners, especially useful if you're a visual learner. You'll associate some image that's relevant to memorizing to remember what's on the daf in your image that's associated with, in the case of daf base, a bias. So, our mnemonic for daf base. What did we talk about in daf base? We talked about reconciling we talked about the relationship of the Mishnah to the Psukim. We talked about exactly why it talked about both. It used the description of the time the Kohanim eat their truma somehow as a definition for Kriya Shema. And then daf base, we talked, Amid base I should say, we talked a lot about reconciling different shittas about the ani and when he eats his bread and when the Kohanim come in. So, and about Kriya Shema, the time for Kriya Shema, of course. So, this would be my mnemonic. You can have your own if you want a different one. We think daf base is a bias, and what's going on in that bias in the house? You have an ani and a Kohen sitting around eating their bread and saying Kriya Shema. Let's say. The truth is, the more ridiculous your image is, then the more memorable it will be. So if you have the Kohen standing on the ani's shoulders, say Kriya Shema while the ani is eating his bread, it will become more memorable to you. As long as you remember it's inside a house. So how that will work down the way is, you'll think, gosh, what was in the base of Brachos? You'll think, well, it's a house picture, because it's a bias, base is bias. What was going on in the house picture? Oh yeah, there was some ani eating his bread with the Kohen standing on his shoulders. What was that all about? Saying bread, Kohen. Oh yeah, they're saying Kriya Shema and the ani, and they were trying to reconcile the time of the ani and the Kohen. Depends on how good your memory is and how complex the image you draw. But at least for our purposes, we will have the ani eating his bread, the Kohen standing on his shoulders saying Kriya Shema inside the house. That'll be your mnemonic for daf base, and you will see that you will be Bez Hashem. If you keep up with this, we'll try to keep up with this in a very segregated way. That you'll be able to run through a whole of the first parak of Brachos in 2 minutes, because you think base of the bias, that was the ani and the Kohen. Okay, that was Kriya Shema and the time. Okay, Gimel was the Gemorah. That's all you'll be able to run through quite quickly. You'll find it very useful. And also, if you remember, the Gemorah tried to reconcile the shittas about the ani and the Kohen. That was in the house. Oh, that's daf base. You'll see it will become quite useful. Trust me. Anyway, so that's our mnemonic for daf base. It'll be the ani eating his bread while the Kohen stands on his shoulders saying Kriya Shema inside the house.
So Ahmed Aleph would be downstairs and on the
Okay, very good. So for our purpose, we'll just shove in whatever we think is most memorable to the house. See what we're. You'll see. You'll be happy. This will work like you later on. Trust me. Seder. Moving on. So we're starting with Gimel today. Bez Hashem. Gimel and Aleph, which is the beginning of what I will call the polar bears. Now, if when I say it's the beginning of the polar bears, you think, what in the world are you talking about? So then, that's not so good. If you think polar bears, let's talking about, oh yeah, we talked about polar bears already, how it's connected, then you're in much better shape. Let me explain what I mean. Both by polar bears, what I mean by you're in much better shape if your mind associated right away to that thing we said before. So I'd said, my kid has a joke. I didn't tell you a joke. My kid has a joke. He says, why is a joke like a frog? Because if you dissect it, it's dead. So I didn't tell you a joke, but we're going to dissect these two statements I said, and we're going to beat it to make it dead afterwards. But I want to explore what I meant by these are polar bears, and what I meant by, if you had some inkling what I meant by that, you're in much better shape than if you didn't. Okay, so in the first day when I gave Shir, introducing what is Talmud and why we learn it, so I said, I told you a riddle, if there's a bear that walks a mile south, and then a mile east, and a mile north, and ends up in the same place it started, then what color is the bear? And I said that only is true if you're in the North Pole, and though you think it's impossible for, your basic knowledge of coordinates and, basic geometry says if you go a mile south and a mile east and a mile north, you won't end up in the same place. But then we said, oh, well, if on the surface of a sphere and you're starting at the North Pole, then you would, and therefore it's a polar bear, it's a white bear. And then in the second day, when I followed up about what Talmud is, so I said, if there's a chazal and they tell you, oh, I once saw a polar bear and it did such and such, and it walked a mile south, a mile east, a mile north, and then end up in the same place, so then you shouldn't roll your eyes and say, oh, those crazy rabbis and what they're talking about, that's impossible. No, they're getting at something, they're speaking metaphorically, but they're getting at something very significant, a way to understand the way the world works in a different and more accurate, more real way than you're used to. And I said, for example, in this case, it's certainly more useful if you're really serious about navigation to understand the world as a sphere, the world is flat. So actually, thinking about the polar bear story actually gives you a much better idea of how the world works, especially if you're talking about the North Pole, really everywhere the world's a curved surface. So, what I meant when I said we're getting into polar bears now, is now begins what is called Aggadah. Aggadah is loosely defined as the non-halachic portions of the Talmud, of the Gemorah. Although we'll see that's not the greatest definition, but in any case, where they're not discussing the Mishnah explicitly, they're not talking about specific halachas, they're telling things that seem like stories or whatever they are, don't seem directly relevant to halacha. And they're typically framed in some kind of symbolic language, metaphorical language. Like polar bear. When I said polar bear, I was referring to an abstract concept, the concept of sometimes you can refer to things which tell you how the world works in a way that isn't self-evident, but actually is more accurate. And that's what Chazal is trying to do. Chazal are trying to give insights into the world, whether it's the physical world or the metaphysical world, to give you a better, more accurate perspective of the world than you otherwise would have by your basic intuition. That's what I meant by polar bears. And what I meant by, if you had an inkling of what I meant when I said polar bears, you're better off than not, is because I think a lot of people are not used to thinking in sort of abstract, symbolic way. They're used to thinking literally, and they want things to be literal and precise within the bounds of normal language and meaning, and they're not used to or not comfortable with thinking in terms of illusions, A-L-L, illusions. And if you're not used to thinking that way, and your mind is not naturally associative, and you didn't think, okay, polar bear reference today to the polar bear reference of last week, you'll probably find it challenging in general to learn the Aggadah, which are like that. Okay, so we will still do it, but you'll have a hard time. As a shame, you'll get used to it, but it'll take some practice. So before I get into any Aggadah, it's not even clear where the Aggadah exactly begins on Tav Gimel. I feel it's a required reading. We must learn an introduction to Aggadah to understand what it is, what it's trying to achieve, and how it works. So the best essay I know that is short and sweet and excellent is the Ramchal's essay on Aggadah. It's found in the introduction to, printed normally in the beginning pages of Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a book worth knowing about. If you don't know about it, Ein Yaakov is a collection of the whole of Shas, but it's only a collection of the non-halachic, the Aggadah portions of Shas, essentially, with some major commentators on Aggadah. There are many other people who explain Aggadah besides those who are featured in Ein Yaakov. In any case, that's like your first, anthology of Aggadah and Shas with many major commentators. So in the beginning there's an introduction that's given by the Ramchal. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, he was born in 1707, the 18th century, early 18th century rabbinic figure. The Vilna Gaon, the Gra, said of him that he had the highest possible understanding of the way Hashem works that's possible for a human being. I don't like that. I don't know, or something like that, loosely translated. So whatever that means, whatever he meant, I don't exactly know. But that's a serious discussion for the Gra, who was not a man known to be especially laudatory and easy with praise. The Ramchal was extraordinary. He lived a relatively short and difficult life, but he wrote a number of Sfarim. Sorry?
40 years of convert.
40 years exactly. A rough life he had. And he was extraordinary in many, many ways. His agenda, it seems to me, was as a philosopher, as we've talked about it. He tried to systematize many different aspects of Jewish thinking. So he wrote a whole book to sort of systemize Jewish grammar, Hebrew grammar, and another one for Talmudic logic, and another one for Talmudic structure. He wrote a systematic approach to how to perfect yourself, which is the most famous work called Mesilas Yesharim. And he wrote another book, Derech Hashem, systematizing basic Jewish hashkafa. He wrote a number of books systematizing the Kabbalah, starting with the Klal Chachman. So he was an extraordinary mind and very rigorous and structured methodical thinker. So he wrote an essay, which is very brief, called
plays.
Sorry?
He also wrote
plays. He's a fascinating character. Yeah. He's a linguist, and his Hebrew is remarkable. His Hebrew was, remember, the modern language of Hebrew was a new phenomenon that's 100 years old, from the basically 20th century, late 19th, 20th century. So his is not modern Hebrew, but it's as if it were. He writes a beautiful, beautiful Hebrew. It's quite flowery and quite difficult at times. So he has an essay which is published called the Ma'amar, which means the essay al Aggados Chazal, on Chazal's. Chazal stands for Chachamenu Zechronom Livracha, our rabbis, our wise men, referring to the Mishnah of Gemorah, of blessed memory, Chazal. So he wrote an essay on it, and I emailed it out last night, both in English and Hebrew. If you didn't get the email, first of all, who's not getting any emails from me ever? No one? Okay, good. If you didn't get the email yet, or didn't have a chance to print it out, or couldn't print it out, I brought some extra copies here in Hebrew. I emailed it in English also. Rav Aaron Feldman, wrote a book, a great book. Let me just pass that over these. Sorry? Just in Hebrew. I said Hebrew. I'm sorry, I didn't put the English one as extra. You have it in your box?
Will you send it out again in English?
Well, last night you got it, I'm sure.
I don't think
Did you get it?
No.
No? I can resend it, but I'm sure if you're getting, some emails are probably getting those emails. No?
I didn't get it.
Okay, I'll check. I'll do it again. Everyone else has? Okay, great. Perfect. So Rav Feldman, who wrote a great book, a fantastic book, which I recommend very highly, called The Juggler and the King. I'm sure it's still available in bookstores off the shelf. He goes through a number of different Aggados, according to the explanation of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, and explains their symbolism. And in the back of the book, he published like an appendix with the translation in English of this essay. So I sent that around also. I'm going to learn it in the original Hebrew. Don't ask me questions if Rabbi Feldman translated it differently than me. I'll refer to him. That's not the point, obviously. But in any case, so this is the Ramchal's explanation of what Aggadah is and how it works. I think it's very important that we understand it before we start grappling with real Aggadah. So we'll do it inside here. That'll probably take us today. So here it says, Mamar al-Aggados Chazal, Mei Sagon al-Makubal al-Aki, whatever. Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. So it says, Hama'amarim ba'Aggados, the different statements of Aggadah, is chalkul the base meaning. Can be divided into two categories. This is classic Ramchal, right? It's already categorizing. So you can categorize the different statements of Chazal, Aggadah statements, into two categories. The first category is Klal HaMa'amarim Halimudim. They're the general, educational statements. Base habiurim. The second category are explanations. So the first category are just standalone statements of information. The second of all are explanatory, meaning we're going to be explaining like verses, what verses that already exist, what they mean. Halimudim. As for the statements which are educational in nature, hem hamamarim asher yagidu bam ikrim me ikri achachma musris o elokis. The statements that are the kind that are educational in their own merit, they tell either the principles, the fundamental principles of chachma hamusarit, ethical wisdom, or elokit, which that's called spiritual wisdom. Probably when I say the word Kabbalah, what you probably think it means, like that. So Kabbalistic type wisdom. So he already divided, just so you keep track, he divided statements of Chazal are got into two categories: standalone educational and explanatory on given verses, and then he's now dividing the standalone educational ones into two categories: ethical teachings and like spiritual, like Kabbalistic type teachings. Biurim, and as for the second category of explaining verses, Hashem Yevaru Bam Kasum Mikisvei HaKodesh, they come to explain whatever verses in the Tanakh. V'hine. So look, Hamarim Halimudim Hamusrim, the statements that Chazal gave to teach you ethics, Ein Tzorach L'davar Le'em Ata. I'm not interested in talking about those at all here. Ki hine, because To'alasam, their purpose, Ufor Semet, anyone can tell what the point of an ethical teaching is. V'if'atam galuya, and their significance is obvious. Ve'ein lit on to'en aleim, and even if you're going to play devil's advocate, it's only you can see what the statement is trying to teach. It says, be a good boy, one or the other, be nice, and that's obvious, that's what else in that. And even if you can be obstinate, even if you don't want to listen to Chazal, by reading those texts, those ethical teachings, you're not going to get into mischief. You're not going to stumble upon them. What I do want to talk about, says the Ramchal, are the statements of Chazal that are Aggadah in nature to educate you, that are talking about spiritual wisdom, like Kabbalistic type teaching, in general, spiritual wisdom. That's the introduction. That's what we're talking about here today. Aggadah that are teaching about something abstract and about the divine spiritual world. So hine. Kvar Yadata, look, it's already, Shema shehevich lachazal lichtov divrei haTorah sheba'al peh, achar yosem makubal etzlam shedevarim sheba'al peh asur lomdom b'chsav. You already know that Chazal went out of their way and wrote down the Torah sheba'al peh, even though they had a tradition, we talked about Gemorah and Gittin, that you're not allowed to write down the Torah sheba'al peh, but they did. Hayin mashe ra'u shehaya hadeos holuchos miskashlos. They saw that people's minds were becoming ever more chalash, people's intellects were weakening. B'orach hagalus, as the exile protracted, just like the line, I forgot to put it, I'm sorry about the line in this video only. The Khalifas Osmanim, and with the vicissitudes of the times, things were rough for the Jews, as I explained to you. But Vasikaron Misma'et, and the capacity for memory was reduced, people didn't remember as much, was diminished. Vasvara Mitkatseret, that's a fascinating idiom. He says that people's ability to be logical, or the ability to go through a logical process, was mitkatseret, became shorter. I assume my understanding of what it means here is that a svara, a logical process, can take multiple steps, many steps, but the ability for the mind to retain all the steps and keep it together became limited. You only could hold together 5 steps, 10 steps of logical arguments, let's say. So people's ability to keep it all in their head was diminished. The nimsa, so it came out, shator mishtakachas, that the Torah would be forgotten. Because the Torah was Baal Peh, but it was too complex, too long, too hard for people to keep, given the weakening of their minds and the difficulty of the tongues. Al-Kain, and therefore, Bachru Mishum Eis Laslos Hashem, they decided, they chose, because of the separate principle of sometimes you have to act for the sake of God and to be Mayfair's Torah, you have to go against what the Torah says, because if you don't, worse will happen. And they decided Lachkok, let's say it's classic Ramchal, Chakuk is engraved, set in stone, so to speak. So Lachkok, they set in stone, conceptually, the Sefer into a book, Pirush HaMitzvahs Kula, an explanation of all the mitzvahs. He means that, I think what he means there by using that Lashon fancy expression of like engrave, is because the whole point of Torah Sheba'al Peh is it should be dynamic. It should be able to change with the time. Not the principles, but the illustrations, the way in which you're illustrating the principle would change given the time and place and what's appropriate. And once you set it in stone, you're talking about, oxen and a whole world of, that may no longer be relevant in a different time and place as we see today. In any case, that's what they did. Laman Yishar Kayam Kol Hayamim, so that at least the Torah Sheba'al Peh should stay extant forever. Hu Klal HaMishnah VaGemorah, and that includes the Mishnah and the Gemorah, as we discussed in our introduction to the Mishnah and Gemorah. They wrote it down so it should be forgotten. V'hine. Now, Hisbonu Od, they also thought about it. V'ra'u Shebachashasha Azos, with the very same concern that the Torah will be forgotten if they don't act. Shechashashu Al Chelak HaMitzvos, that they were afraid about what you do and don't do in terms of Torah observance. Roi Haya Lachush, the same fear was applicable. Gamkin Al Chelak Sisrei HaTorah, to the secrets of the Torah. The fear was also relevant. V'ikri Halokis, Alokios, and the same with the principles of the spiritual world. Ach, ein hatikun shenimtzu l'chelak hamitzvos roi l'chelak hasodos. The problem was that the solution they had for the keeping of the mitzvahs, like we have the Mishnah, wasn't appropriate for the secrets of the Torah. Now I want to say something about the word secrets of the Torah. This is an important point I want to make. Very important points in terms of how this works. So I mentioned to this idea of pardes. So according to the Rambam and others, I said pardes. When I said introduction, pardes means science, maybe philosophy, and maybe Kabbalah. I shouldn't say maybe, like all those things. It's brought down that pardes is a acronym for Pshat, Remez, Drosh, Sod. The four levels of Torah learning. Pshat means a simple understanding. It means like when you flay an animal, so it's called hafshata. You mafshit it because the animal is something complex, three-dimensional, complex structure, and when you flay it, you take off the skin, you're mafshit it. So then, at least on the surface level, it's laid flat out. You understand? So there was something multidimensional and complex, and it's been eliminated. The complexity has been wiped away. But at least what you do have, you take the bear skin, now it's a bear skin rug, at least that lays flat and smooth and straightforward. Even though perhaps, I should point out, if you carry the mashal further, much as the world isn't flat, it's round. When you lay it flat, you come to some kind of problems with how you project it and so on, because the world isn't flat. Bears are not really flat either, and if you want to understand a bear, you just look at a bear skin line on the ground, of course you'll have a misapprehension of what bears really are, because they're not flat. They're three-dimensional objects. But notwithstanding, the Torah is similar in that really it's multi-dimensional set of wisdom. That's a ridiculous way of saying it, whatever. It's multifaceted, and to lay it flat and just see the pshat level is on one level make it visible and clear and straightforward, and of course it's obscuring what it really is. But be that as it may, pshat is that level of understanding. The surface level, just the skin deep level, but at least it's flat and clear and the contours are taken away, so it's something to be understood. That's pshat. Remez is a deeper level. It means allusions, A-L-L, allusions, hints, better translation, hints. Think like gematria, stuff like that is in the world of remez. The things are hinted to by some internal system reference. I think that all literature uses, much literature uses these kind of referential stuff, not gematrias, but references one to the other. Allusions, literary allusions. And there's a deeper level of drush. Drush requires what I call the decoder ring. There's the 13 ways in which Torah is Dredresh Behen. The Torah is decoded in 13 different ways. That there's certain things that are embedded in there with an extra vav or extra base or repeated word or something. Remember we said Shinantam Altikir Shinantam Shilash. That's a drush. There's an extra nun there which is telling you something when they extrapolate it. That you couldn't pull out on your own. You need a Masorah for a drush to work.
Would that be the Torah codes also? Torah codes also?
I don't know what Torah codes. I don't know. If Torah codes are there, I guess it'd be in the Ramazan department. It's one step up, right? This means these specific. The Torah. I don't want to discuss drushes too much now, but the Torah is. I call it a decoder ring. Maybe that seems silly and superficial, but the reason why I use an example, and I guess the first time we get to a kol v'chomer, I'll speak at length. that a kol v'chomer is not logic. We'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. But like Hashem could have said, "This is the Torah, and you want to understand it. You got to count every third word or every third letter, and that's my message is count every third letter." He could have done that. He could have done anything he wants. It's his book. He can give any decoding method he wants. Hashem said there are 13 decoding methods. Let's say there are 13 midos, and that's what there are. And that's what Hashem wanted the Torah decoded by. There's nothing like intrinsically logical about reading the third letter, or if two psukim come to contradict one another, the third one comes like. There's nothing like logically compelling why that happened that way, but the Torah is written in some way that's Hashem said it's written with a code, and there's a decoder written, so to speak. And if you follow the legend to decode it, you can extract more information. That's the world of drasha. We'll see drasha in the Gemorah. I'll discuss more then. What I want to focus on at the moment is sod, the deepest level. So sod means secret. Now, if what we're describing is something intrinsic, we're saying this part of the level is surface level pshat, and these are hints, and these are drashas. So sod has to mean that something that be'etzem, it's intrinsically a secret, which is a little strange because when you think about something being secretive, that wouldn't normally be an intrinsic description. It's something extrinsic, meaning I have a secret that my wife's pregnant. Whereas that she's pregnant is a fact. She's pregnant, but it doesn't matter. Right? It's a fact. Now I'm not telling you. That's what makes it a secret. But the fact that she's pregnant or not pregnant is the fact, and the fact that it's also a secret is nothing intrinsic to the fact. It's just that I'm not telling you. I could make it not be a secret by saying, hey, my wife is pregnant. That would stop it from being a secret on the spot. So that can't be what the Torah is saying. There's certain parts of the Torah that are secret, that are sod, that all of a sudden, if someone tells a secret, they're always secret, they're no longer a secret. That's impossible. But then it wouldn't be a sod be'etzem. Just no one told you yet. Well, a lot of things people didn't tell you yet. Those make them intrinsic secrets. That is things that you're not privy to. But the Torah having something that's called sod, that something's a secret, it means that no one's going to tell you because there aren't words for it. That's the depth of what it means to use a sod. This is something that defies words. Language will not capture these concepts. And that's a very unusual thing to think about, and it's very difficult. And that's the world that we're dealing with the Chachma Elokis that the Ramchal is talking about. The reason why words will not capture this is because the way words work is we have a common experience that we usually, because of one of our five senses, let's say, we encounter something, and then we put a word to our common experience, and then we nod our heads and say, oh, that's when we use this word, we mean that same experience. So in other words, you and I go to see this crazy activity of people standing on either side of a net with sticks and rackets and balls banging back and forth, and we say, oh, that's tennis. Oh, tennis, good word for tennis. And we now can agree this is called tennis, this game. And we see a leaf and it's green, we say green, and we nod green. And then maybe it's ambiguous. Was it the leaf that's green, or the leaf that's green? But the next time we see a leaf and it's brown, and we say green, so then you say, oh, I get it. Green means the color, not the object. And that's how language works. Children pick it up, but it's observing. But often it only works if you're dealing with things that you and I can agree we're having a common experience about. It's obvious we're observing tennis or we're looking at a green leaf. Fine. But if we're speaking of something abstract that is something that's only on inside your head, only in your head, and there's nothing out there, or it's even if let's talk about a concept like gravity or love, something like that. So no one's observing with their five senses really love or gravity, really. Right? It's the notion of gravity is something that's abstract, right? So we now can talk about this idea and symptoms of it. Like gravity is a phenomenon. Let's say either you can talk about like the curvature of space-time, which is probably way too abstract for the moment, or I could say that everything attracts everything else, which is also a fine way of describing it for now. Gravity. So all we really experience is that like things fall to the ground. But that's not really gravity. That's a symptom of gravity, but there's also a gravitational force between me and you, although I never experience it. So what happens is you go to a bunch of science classes, you hear these abstract ideas, and you start to assemble this concept, and you get a word to it. But you never actually see it, at most see symptoms of it, at most. And it's much more abstract. And when we talk about things like attraction for gravity, that's useful, but if the truth of gravity is, and it really is the truth, that it's not attraction, it's just that space-time is curved in 4 dimensions, and things move in a straight line in 4 dimensions, since those words mean nothing to most of us, so we'll think of it in a simplified way about attraction. It's not really right at all. But to get the idea of space-time being curved is very, very abstract, and therefore we'll work with mashal in the meantime. And the same with anything. I don't know, we'll talk about I'll take something much more familiar to all of us. Like, if I say, oh, this has a steep learning curve, Like, oh, you want to study economics, you want to study accounting, there's a steep learning curve. I hope that phrase means something to everyone here. Like those, but the literal words steep learning curve have actually nothing at all to do with the subject of accounting at all. Just that I'm referring to other things metaphorically. You've climbed up other steep things, you know they're hard to ascend, and steep means that's, you know, I get a lot of, you know, it's hard to get up at the beginning and so on. And I'm applying this totally abstract and really unrelated concept called steep curves to something called accounting. But they're not at all related. I'm just borrowing something that's familiar to you to describe something that's totally abstract, like the experience of learning accounting, which I have no words for, and no common experience, no sensory input. So I can never tell you what it is, how, you want to know how it is like to learn accounting? All I can tell you is, oh, there's a steep learning curve, and I'll borrow other things that you have experience with. So if we're talking about, I don't know, angels and souls and metaphysical forces and all sorts of things that happen up there, even the words up there is a great example of purely metaphorical, because the realm above this one in terms of causality of Hashem is no more up than it is down, obviously. But I have no dimension to reverse, that's convenient. So I say up there, because you're used to thinking, oh, like up there is like things that are bigger than me, like the moon, the sun, and the galaxy. There's big things. So up there. But really, of course, I think up about it, just like steep about economics or whatever, or accounting. So we're forced to speak in metaphor, which actually has no direct relevance whatsoever. But we dance around the idea until eventually you get it. And that's what we mean by sod. Now we're going to talk about, if we talk about a neshama, neshama doesn't look like anything, doesn't taste like anything. It's like not like anything you've ever experienced at all. Therefore, what we'll do is we'll take different aspects of what the neshama does, or how it affects things, and we'll talk about, in pure metaphor, we'll talk about people blowing glass and light streaming down, and all sorts of other abstractions which have nothing to do with neshamas at all. There's no light in the neshama, there's no blowing in the neshama, there's no wind in the neshama, there's no movement in the neshama in a normal sense, and so on. But I have no other ways to describe it, so I'll talk about things like that. I'll talk about a ladder or a chain, because you're familiar with ladders and chains, even though the neshama, of course, isn't a chain or a ladder in any way. It's a totally abstract thing, but I have no other way to talk about it. So what we're talking here when we say sodos are things that are in the non-physical world, and because they're non-physical and you're stuck to your physical senses, you and I have no direct experience whatsoever with them. So we'll talk in terms that are familiar with us, and we'll say somehow it's analogous. Somehow what attraction is somehow analogous to curved space-time, and steep curves are somehow analogous to the experience of learning accounting, and chains are somehow analogous to what a soul is, because that's what we're stuck with. So that's the pshat what it means that they're a sod. Because the ever more abstract they are, the ever more silly words become. Like to really talk about the neshama in terms of a chain is ridiculous. Like, there's nothing at all about a chain. It's like, but it's the best we can do. We talk in pure metaphor. That's what he's saying. That's what he's getting to over here. That we're talking about the secrets of the Torah. I mean, things that actually have no words, but we can describe them metaphorically. Now, however well we can describe them metaphorically, he's saying here that Chazal, now bring it back to the text here, he said, listen, let's say Chazal had great metaphors and could describe the spiritual world perfectly. Still, as he's about to describe, they didn't want to. The same way they wanted to write down a Mishnah to codify the laws, they did not want to write down some sort of even metaphorical text to make people to easily understand what's going on in the spiritual realms. Why? So now back inside here, I'm at the words. The last word in the line is ach in the second paragraph here. I don't read it in English. Ach, chelik hasodos, the portion of the Torah that's secret, because it's secret. Ein roi sheyimsor kach lefnei kol harotze litol es Hashem. Let's skip some lines.
I think you did, yeah.
I may skip some lines if I didn't mean to. I'll just go back a second. So I don't know if I missed anything from content. But he says the same concern they have, I'll translate freely as I translate English and Hebrew at the same time. The same concern they had regarding the Torah being forgotten with the explanation of the mitzvahs, the same fears was applicable to the secrets of the Torah and the principles of spirituality, what the Kabbalistic wisdoms call it, except that the solution they found for the mitzvah portion of the Torah wasn't appropriate for the secret, the Sodos portion. I didn't skip it, by the way. V'zeki biura mitzvos. Yeah, that's one sentence. V'zeki. The reason is because biura mitzvos v'adinim ein hezek klal. If a person misunderstands a Mishnah, so like that won't ruin his worldview. He'll misunderstand what's mutter, asr, and Shabbos, which is significant, but he won't have a wrong understanding of what it means to be a human being, let's say. But and if the rules are written in an open way for everyone to access. But the secret portion of the Torah, it wasn't appropriate to just give it out to anybody, to make an open book for everyone to read it. For anybody who wants to decide, I'm a Kabbalist. Little Hashem is an idiom we saw in Brachos. We'll see it in our Mishnah's Brachos. You can't, just because you think you're deserving the title, doesn't mean you are deserving the title of a Kabbalist. And they didn't want to make it any old Kabbalist to pick it up. Lo mitzad yikar hamuskolos. First of all, not because of the like the dearness, the value of these ideas. Lo mitzad omkam, and also not because of their depth. It also is inappropriate. Imitzad yikram. First of all, from the side of the fact that they're very precious things to Hashem. Ki eno kvodo shel abore, would not be proper kavod, honor to Hashem. Yisbarach, sheyimasro sisrav bidei anshe midos ros. It just would be totally inappropriate to give Hashem's secrets over to people that have bad midos. It would be terrible for people with bad midos to have access to that. They should not be initiates. V'afilu sheyu chachamim mechukamim. Even if they're like really brilliant scholars, it doesn't matter. If they're bad guys, bad people, then they have no business. Hashem wouldn't want to be close to them and doesn't want them knowing his secrets. V'imitzad amkam, from the side that they're just so deep. Sharei hanyanim be'emes amukim ma'od. The truth is, says Ramchal, these really are tremendously deep ideas. It's really incomprehensible to people unless they really have refined minds. Umelumadim b'darchei iyun heitev, and people who are trained in like thinking clearly and rigorously. And if these secrets would be encountered by unrefined minds, or people who just, they are not experienced, not trained in proper thinking, so then yotziu hanyanam hamitim v'yikarim l'shibushim v'deos ros. So these heavy-duty ideas that how Hashem works and how the world works, and that are true, would be like ruined into like into shibushim, like to nonsense. It'll be converted, misunderstood by these people who haven't got proper minds to understand it. Now come around talking nonsense, as you hear all the time. People, these supposedly Kabbalistic thinkers, are talking a bunch of nonsense. But deos ros, and worse, actually damaging ideas. People get all sorts of weird ideas. Maybe you're familiar with the story of Shabbatai Tzvi. There's one example, who started walking around telling people that, he was a leading Kabbalist at the time, and supposedly in a false Mashiach, and the next thing you know, he had all sorts of ideas about people should do terrible things in the name of Kabbalistic tikkunim and so on. I don't know if he didn't understand it, but the point is, bad people can get very bad, wrong ideas from these ideas. So Al-Kain, therefore, Gamru, they resolved, L'tzova esadin, to come to a compromise. V'hainu lichtav osam. On the one hand, they were torn between writing it down and having these secrets given over to bad people and harming them, perhaps, harming people, on the one hand, or not writing it down and having it being forgotten. So they came to a compromise. They're going to write it down, but leman lo yovdu min hadoros, so that they shouldn't be lost to the generations, hachronim, the later generations. Ach b'drachim hane'elamin u'minei chidos. They would write it down in hidden ways. The word olam means the world is from the same root. Ne'elam, hidden, because Hashem hid himself when he created the world. So there's hidden ways. U'minei chidos, and kind of riddles, and riddles. Shlo yuchol lamod aleihem. Therefore, they wouldn't be comprehensible, something like that. Elami shemasru lo hamaftechos, except to those who were initiates who had been handed over the keys. Dahainu haklalim, i.e. the rules, the principles. Shebehem yovnu haramazim, they can understand the hints and allusions. V'yafroshu hachidos, and to unravel the riddles. Hahem. Umishlo nimsru lo mftechos, if it's a he who didn't have the keys in his hand to unlock the strange riddles, you lefanav kedivrei sefer chasuma. It's like, it would be like a locked book, a closed book to them. Kilo lo nichtav klal, it's like the words never written down. I'll give you an illustration what I mean by this. What he means by this, I should say. I'll give you an example. A funny example. To me, funny example. So, in this class, we have half of us are initiates and half of us aren't initiates. Those who learn touch and nature, those people are initiates, and the rest of you aren't. So, if I write something like this on the board, so those of you who are not initiates will look at this on the board and you will think, I don't know, that's some kind of tic-tac-toe game, that's probably wrong or something, I don't know what. You'll make no sense of this at all. Doesn't mean anything. This is a closed book where money will not be written, because this symbol to you is utterly meaningless. But to those of us who are initiates, who came to the Mishnah Shir and learned Tefillin, will say, oh yeah, I can see, this is talking about a woman who gave birth, and therefore she's the Yoledesh Esrim, two birds that can be either or pigeon or a dove, as long as they're the same type. One has to be an olos, one has to be a chatas. And she also made a neder that she's going to bring another pair of birds, which has to be olos, but she had a particular type of mind, either tor or either a pigeon or a dove, but she can't remember which one it was. That's what that says over there. So obviously, those of you who are not initiates will say, like, you got to be kidding. But everyone else says, yeah, that's exactly what it says, right? So the reason why is because we have a code that we've developed in-house to explain certain cases, and this is our code for that idea. So if you're inside, you're an insider. If you're an outsider, this is totally irrelevant. And what will happen is you start puzzling over these great ancient, rabbinic texts. You come with all sorts of fascinating theories what this is supposed to mean, and I'm sure people will, what this is symbolic of. But you better believe that in a million years they will never come up with the fact that we're talking about a woman who has to bring, two pairs of birds, one because she's the lens, one because she made another. You have no chance. But you'll come with other crazy ideas. Everyone have PhDs on what this is meant to mean and decipher it, but they have no chance. That's what he's saying. That Chazal are going to talk about use codes that are symbolic in nature, which if you don't have a way to unlock it, it's impossible. It's impossible. They're meaningless except to an initiate. And the truth is, we have some, if you can read music, let's say, you can look at a score and say, oh, I see, you see a symbol like this, and you say, oh, a score with lots of these kind of symbols, you say, oh yeah, that's the Moonlight Sonata. So someone will, what? Yeah, it's a piece of music, can't you see? What do you mean see music? I don't see any music, there's a bunch of dots and lines. But any symbolic system is like that. There's a code you develop amongst yourselves, and once you know the code, then something is very plain and clear. But if you don't know the code, you can be speaking about something very, very abstract, but so the insider knows, the outsider has no chance of anything.
It's like written language, like Chinese or Hebrew.
Like written language, right. Something like written language, exactly. Until you get like this, like Rosetta Stone, you can uncode it, And one of my favorite, my kids, it's true like this in everything. Any symbolic system. If you've studied chemistry, this, oh yeah, that's that wet stuff that comes out of your tap. It's just some letter, it doesn't mean anything. But it means plenty if you know what it's supposed to mean. If you don't know what it's supposed to mean, it means nothing. Yeah. One of my kids' favorite jokes I tell them, but they retell it every Pesach Seder. What did the blind man say when he took off his matzah? He said, "Who wrote this rubbish?" Anyway, so that's what happens. You go look at it, it's like, who wrote this rubbish? These are all totally meaningless gobbledygook on the board. But if you know this is describing music, this is describing more, this is describing that funny case, and so on. So that's what he's saying. He's saying Chazal made up a language all their own that describe these abstract ideas, which these are also abstract ideas, but what you develop a system, the system works for those who are insiders. If you're not an insider, then the system is an utterly closed book. So that was their pshar. They're going to write it down, but they'll write it down in a way that until you have the decoder rings, actually it's like different mashal, until you have the system, how it decodes, it's as if it wasn't written at all. The keys to understanding it, Ishuram miyad talmidim, they left them, they passed on the keys to their students. Shekalu miyadam, they passed on one to the next. Va'amlam alehem samchu shlo yimsru ela talmidehem achreim hagunim tahem. The deal was, the understanding was, they're not going to teach the next generation of students they won't teach people the keys unless they are fitting to participate in this Hashem's deepest secrets, meaning that they're good people and they're not going to harm themselves. V'chein medor el dor. That's how it went from generation to generation. V'hem as hiru came, tziv l'chol maskil. The rabbis like gave a hazara, like a rule, like a warning, like a rule against, a warning. L'chol maskil umalamed shehei mazhir umachriz l'chol l'kol. They warned everybody like this. They should let the word out. Shedivrei chacham v'chidosam tzrichim limud. The message has to be that when Chazal say something, and they're talking about polar bears, which is their own mashal for whatever we're going to see later on in the Mishnayos, these things need limud. They're not to be taken on face value. Chazal were speaking symbolically, using language but symbolically, the way I use the word polar bear. And therefore, if you want to understand it, you need to get clear what is going on. And if someone who a mind approaches trying to understand these things without the keys to lock it, he's just asking for trouble. He's begging to misunderstand. Like all these PhDs would write papers on those symbols, which you're begging to get it wrong. Vulam, however, his hiram v'hazhara hazos, once the word has been out, that don't bother trying, you'll be misunderstanding. If you do, if some guy wants to descend and try to make sense of these without a clue how to do it, the kashel achur, and he stumbles backwards. V'nishbar, he gets smashed up. I don't know, psychologically, mentally, his hashkafas get ruined. V'hine dama barosho, literally his blood's on his head. It's his own fault. V'hem es nafsham hitzilu. But though the rabbis, they are exonerated, they've washed their hands clean of it because they warned you. They said, we've closed the book off, and it's not meant to be understood by speculation. And if you speculate and get it wrong, and you have bad hashkafas, it's your own fault. Okay. We'll start this next paragraph here. The way in which they hid these things, they're in different ways. One way in which they concealed this information, through metaphor and mashal, like a parable. So either they speak metaphorically, like a polar bear, or parables. Everyone knows mashal madav doma. There was a king and a servant, that kind of stuff. When you hear the word king and servant, you're initiated enough to know, the king is always Hashem. It's obvious, right? But you wouldn't know. You think just some fairy tale unless you know that's how the system works. This method of metaphorical, parabolic language is like a well-known literary technique amongst experts of literature, something like that. Asher al yesod dimyon ba'mashal, through imagination and through metaphor, yachsu mikrim upulos l'mi she'ein hamikrim hahem upulos hahem nechon lo klal. Like I described before, you can use sort of metaphor to talk about things which, this is referring to the idea I said about the steep learning curve. You could talk about learning curves, even though there's nothing curvy about accounting, but you can, literally means they could apply some analogous language to an event or an action, even though that particular event or that action actually has no true relevance in this particular description. Like steep learning curve, nothing steep about accounting, but we're borrowing a term. That's the first way, through metaphorical language. And parable is like a kind of metaphor, right? Parable is a story that embeds metaphor. Sometimes it's straight up thing. Base, the second way in which they encoded excuse me, these secrets, okay. Habesu derech ha'elam, it's through a secret hidden way. V'hainu shalimu tanai ha'inyan v'lo yivaru. They concealed the parameters of this particular statement, and they didn't explain them. Usually, when you say something, you have caveats, you have footnotes. This apply, I don't know, if I say a bear can walk a mile south, mile east, mile north, and end up in the same place, there's an obvious caveat, which is we're talking about the North Pole. So when he's saying, they make statements like oh yeah, white bears can travel a mile north, mile south, mile east, mile west. Mile south, mile east, mile north, end up in the same place. And you'll be thinking, well, that's ridiculous. No, they can't. I've seen 100 things do that and never do. And they never explained, oh, well, we're talking about the North Pole. So that's what he's saying here. That they hid things and they didn't give the parameters to Nai Ha'inyan, like the conditions by which the statement will be true. V'yomru ma'amar muchlak. It is said like an absolute statement and didn't qualify it whatsoever. Vein amitas ha'ma'amarahu ela b'gvul. The truth of the particular statement isn't just generally true, it's only true within certain parameters. Dahainu lefi b'china achas ulefi zman achas, only in a certain kind of aspect, a certain kind of time. Ulefi noseh u'makom echad, it's only applicable to a particular subject or to a particular place, like North Pole, not any white bear, or any time, or any place, and so on. Umishika chamamrahu kolel muchlat, if someone just reads it as just a general statement, an absolute statement, without any understanding that it's qualified, because there's no qualifications given, yikashel v'yishtabesh, you'll just get it all wrong and make nonsense of it. So I'm just trying to think what to do because we're starting to build up outside there. Well, we have 10 minutes. Ukvar ma'amarim rabim yiru kesoshim zeh. If you look, you'll see lots of statements that seem to contradict one the other. Ya'an lo pirshu tanayim, because they didn't explain their conditions. So if you don't qualify them, then they seem to overlap and contradict. Vayodea kol davar begvulo, but if you know the parameters of each particular statement, in some amitim, you will then see, of course, each one is true in their own. Ubli stira klal, none contradicts the other once you understand why they apply. Ukvar tira shekem mikra kazek kara gam laharbe mamari hadinim mitzvos. You see, actually, this happens many times, even in the rules of, the Mishnayos contradict one the other. Afal pishlo nasa davar kazos hakavana shetimsa b'shas mamarim obraisos shebehevin osam behechlet o yaoso ima emes o yisiru zemzeh. In other words, I'm summarizing, I'm nervous of time here. You see that two statements of a Mishnah or a Brisa contradict one or the other, and you can't resolve them. And then upirshim b'shas, then the Gemorah says, oh no, it says b'mamarim hacha, b'mamarim, and they will say, oh, when it comes to two Mishnayos, this Brisa, whatever it is, hacha b'mayaskinan, that's praise. Hacha b'mayaskinan, you've seen before, which means like, hear what we are talking about, and that's what will define the parameters. We say, oh, the Mishnah is in any type of place, it's hacha b'mayaskinan, we're talking about a particular event or parameter or aspect or time or place. And that's how you see that even this kind of talk when Chazal and Mishnayos, let alone talking about these more abstract ideas. When the Gemorah says Hachal Ma'askinan, it will define each Brisa or Mishnah in its proper context, and then V'nimtzu Kulam Nechonim V'yisharim. Then each one seems right and there's no contradictions and everything is straightforward. So he just said that's the same way even with Mishnah. So what did we say? We're out of time, but I'll just summarize what we said so far. He said that we're talking about, he said that Aggadahs are in two categories, standalone educational and explanatory. So forth in the educational ones. The ones that talk about not Musar, but about Chachma Elokis, divine wisdom. And he said, Chazal wanted to write it down, it shouldn't be forgotten. They didn't write it down. If they did write it down, it would be lost. So they made a pshara, they made a compromise. They'll write it down and hide it in one of two ways. Either with metaphorical language, mashalos, or in totally hidden ways by not giving the parameters where the statement is true. They make general statements, which you need to then understand they are of limited applicability. We'll stop there for today, and Bez Hashem tomorrow.